everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here and I'm so glad you clicked on today's video. You already know what we're doing by the title, by the thumbnail. We are going to be doing my April reading wrap up. I'm so excited to actually sit down and film this for you guys because I haven't done a reading wrap up literally in the longest time, and I've been getting so many questions and messages from you guys like, where are the reading wrap ups? When are you doing them again? We're finally doing them again. In the month of April, we actually read some really great books. I read a total of 8 books, which is pretty good for me. I average like 6 to 7 books every month, so 8 is a pretty good number for me. Rating wise, I feel like we were kind of on the lower side of ratings for me. I feel like I'm a super easygoing rater, but the more I read, the more harsher I feel like I get with my ratings. And this month was definitely one of those months where I was feeling a little nitpicky. I was feeling a little harsh with some of the ratings. We are gonna hop right into it. I feel like I had a good variety this month. I read a ton of romances. We have some sport romances, cowboy romances, and then I read 2 fantasy books, which I am super excited to talk about, but we'll go in order of what I read first. And the first book I actually completed in the month of April is Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. If you're not familiar with this series, it's book 2 in the Boys of Tommen series, and book 1 and book 2 revolve around Johnny and Shannon, and then book 3 and 4 revolve around Shannon's older brother Joey, and then Taming 7 just came out, which is book 5 that revolves around Gibbsy and Claire, which die-hard Gibbsy and Claire fan. Anyways, we read book 2. This was the second half to Johnny and Shannon's story. If you haven't like seen much about this series, it's definitely an emotional roller coaster. Like, don't go into this thinking that you won't cry, because you will definitely cry. So fair warning if you're looking to get into this series. There's also a lot of sensitive and possibly triggering things talked about in this series, so definitely look at the trigger warnings and stuff like that. This is basically an Irish rugby romance. Johnny Kavanagh is the star rugby player at his school. He's basically guaranteed to go pro as soon as he graduates, so everybody literally idolizes him. And then Shannon is basically the shy, quiet girl who is new to Tommen. She basically transfers from a different school where she was getting bullied a lot, so she goes to Tommen hoping to start fresh and not have any problems with anybody, because it seems wherever she goes, problems and bad things seem to follow her. She's hoping that Tommen is kind of like her fresh start, and she's really just trying to make it by. She comes from a very rough and not the best at home life. I can't get too much into it because I don't want to spoil it for you, but she basically comes from a very rough at home life where she's dealing with a lot there. This story is definitely heavy on her at home life and what she's dealing with. Very emotional. It's heartbreaking. A lot happens in this story, but aside from the emotional roller coaster the story puts you through, there are a lot of very sweet moments between Johnny and Shannon. There's a ton of funny moments, especially with Gibbsy. Gibbsy is Johnny's best friend, and whenever Gibbsy is mentioned or brought up, whenever it's a Gibbsy scene, it's like 99% guaranteed that there's gonna be something hilarious happening. Gibbsy's gonna be saying something crazy and funny. Gibbsy honestly made this book so fun in my opinion. I ended up rating this 5 stars. I think it was my this is my third 5-star of 2024. Book 1 was also a 5-star. I love the writing style of Chloe Walsh. I think her characters are written so beautifully, especially the sensitive topics that are talked about in this book. I feel like the way she writes about the sensitive topics is so good. It's so beautiful. It's very realistic, and she really pulls emotions out of you as the reader. She makes you feel for every character in this series. I feel like it's so beautifully written, so beautifully well done. I have to say Johnny Kavanagh is probably one of my favorite book boyfriends, at least in the romance genre, because I have a lot of favorites in the romantasy genre, but if we're talking romance, I think he is easily like the best book boyfriend I have ever read about. The way he cares for Shannon, the way he takes care of her, it's just so sweet. Their love story is probably one of my favorite love stories I've ever read about. It's truly something that is sticking with me. I've literally never read anything like this before, so I feel like that also is why I was so invested and interested in it. The found family trope in here is also so sweet. Again, Gibbsy and Claire are some of my favorite characters out of this entire series. And then the last thing I'll say about it is I feel like these characters are very relatable. I love when I read about characters that I can relate to. I feel like when you're able to relate to characters too in books, it almost creates like that emotional connection for you. So I absolutely love this. It was 5 stars. Book 1 and book 2 are listed as YA. I feel like book 1 could pass as a YA. I feel like book 2 is definitely pushing it just because there is a little bit more spice in here than book 1. I feel like book 1 was very clean for the most part. Just the emotional touchy topics that are mentioned in this book could be a little like too much or overwhelming for younger people. I feel like it's really all about preference and what you like to read. These are listed as young adult, but definitely look into trigger warnings, look into people's reviews before jumping into it if you're kind of on the fence of if you would like it or not. I loved it. It was 5 stars. It's easily becoming one of my favorite series of 2024. The books are very chunky, and I've actually gotten so many questions and messages about the Boys of Tommen series because they're very like chunky books. The font is like itty bitty on the pages. So when I started the series, I was very intimidated and I just didn't know if I would like it because of how long the books are. But when you start the book, you literally don't even think about how long it is or how many pages are in it because you get so sucked into it. You get so emotionally attached to the characters, to what's going on. Like, you literally don't even think about how long the books are. So my piece of advice to those of you out there who want to start the Boys of Tommen series, just do it. Like, literally just pick the book up and start it because you won't regret it. You won't even think of like how long the book is once you get into it. After that, I actually jumped in to a brand new release, which is Wild Love by Elsie Silver. So excited for this one. It's book 1 in the Rose Hill series. If you guys aren't familiar, I'm sure most of you know who she is, but Elsie Silver is the author of the Chestnut Spring series. It's a really fun cowboy romance series that I tackled last year. This is book 1 in her newest series. It takes place in the same universe as Chestnut Springs, and what's really cool about this book specifically is our main character Ford is actually the older brother to Willow, who book 2 in the Chestnut Springs series is all about. I feel like that's a really cool connection between the two series. This is all about Ford and Rosie. This is basically like an enemies to friends to lovers romance, the brother's best friend trope. Rosie's older brother is best friends with Ford. Basically, Ford is the best friend to Rosie's older brother, so they all grew up together, and Rosie was always the younger sister tagging along with them, and I feel like her and Ford were kind of always butting heads, getting on each other's nerves, but nonetheless, whenever Rosie needed him, Ford was always there to help her out, save the day, whatever it may be. Rosie's main goal though growing up was always to leave Rose Hill. She didn't want to stay there forever. I believe she takes off to Denver, and then a decade later she ends up moving back to Rose Hill out of the blue. When Rosie returns to Rose Hill though, she finds that everything has changed. Ford is now like the world's hottest billionaire, something like that. It's kind of cheesy. When Rosie returns home, she's looking for work, and Ford is quick to offer her a job as his assistant. They start working close together. She's basically helping him build the studio, set up everything with the artist, and from that point on, they're still butting heads like they used to, but they're also slowly figuring out that maybe there was something more between them growing up, and they're kind of getting a second chance, basically. This is also a single dad trope, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't know going into it was gonna be like a single dad trope, but you guys will have to read it to find out all the juicy deets. I ended up rating this a 3.5 star rating. I really enjoyed it, but there were definitely parts of it that were just kind of like lacking for me, such as the single dad trope. I wish we kind of got more details into that because I feel like it's kind of just thrown at us super fast without a lot of explanation. I also enjoyed Ford and Rosie's like love story in this, but I was just looking for something more. I don't know what it was exactly, but this just felt like it was lacking a little bit for me. But other than that, I actually really enjoyed it. I did think that this was gonna be like a cowboy romance. I think it's because of the Chestnut Spring series being like cowboy based. Going into this, I thought we were gonna have more of like the cowboy vibes in it, but it ended up being just like a cute small town romance, country vibes. Rosie's the younger sister to his best friend that's just been driving him crazy his entire life. Overall, I thought this was really cute. Something I really love about Elsie Silver is definitely her writing style. It's a very easygoing, bingeable type of writing style. Next up, I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. This is book 1 in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. There's just something so good and exciting about reading cowboy romances in the springtime. Like, the vibes are just immaculate. Done and Dusted definitely gave off all the good cowboy vibes. Basically, this tells a story of Emmy and Luke. Emmy is the younger sister to Luke's best friend, so very similar story setup to Wild Love. Emmy and Luke grew up together. There's definitely more of like an enemies to lovers in this book because they were always butting heads when they were younger. Even as they got older, they were still butting heads. But Emmy basically leaves her hometown in Wyoming to go to college, build a career for herself. She rides horses professionally. briefly, and then she ends up having a very scary big accident while riding, and she decides to come home to Rebel Blue. Nobody knows she's coming home, so when she turns up, her whole family's kind of like, what's going on? When she returns home to Rebel Blue though, she finds that Luke is still there doing the same old with her brothers. He's one of the ranch hands, so he's helping out on the ranch and the farm all the time. When Emmy comes home and sees Luke for the first time after like a decade, she's very surprised to find that he's not the same like troublemaking boy she grew up with. He's actually like a full adult now. That still doesn't stop them from bickering though. Luke and Emmy kind of just fall back into their normal typical banter. As they're spending more time together and stuff like that, they are also realizing that maybe there was something more to their relationship than they thought there was. They're both really nervous though to tell her older brother, tell their families. They know there's gonna be issues and conflict and stuff like that, but nonetheless, I absolutely loved this book. I ate it up. It ended up being 4 stars for me, and the vibes in this were just so good, guys. Cowboy vibes, the small town vibes. I literally was living for this book. It gave me everything that I was hoping for, honestly. Lana Ferguson said a sweet slow burn, sunshine in written form, and I feel like that is the perfect way to describe this book. It's literally sunshine in written form, and it just made me so happy. This is marked as a slow burn, but I feel like it was a little bit more insta-lovey. The slow burn basically didn't slow burn like the whole time. It was very quick. After that book, I jumped into book 2, which is Swift and Saddled, and this is actually a really good slow burn. I feel like the majority of this book was like the slow burn, and I loved it. This is about Ada and Weston. Weston is the older brother to Emmy. He's not the oldest, he's like the middle child, and Ada is basically brought in to help him redesign this house on Rebel Blue property. Weston's main goal in this book is to basically bring this house back to life on their property that has been abandoned for like a really long time. I guess it's where like his dad's family kind of grew up. Weston basically wants to bring it back to life and make it an inn where people can come and stay on the ranch. Ada's brought in to help him out with it. But what I really liked about this book is that in the beginning of it, him and Ada actually have a really funny run-in with one another before they even realize who they are to each other. So I feel like it sets up the whole story and makes it so much more fun and exciting. The slow burn in here is absolutely amazing. We also get a lot of forced proximity in here because Ada is staying at the main house where Weston stays. All around, it's absolutely adorable. The cowboy vibes are immaculate. This ended up being another 4-star for me. I am literally obsessed with this series, and I cannot wait for the last book to come out. The last book comes out, I believe, in November. I think I saw came out, which I'm really bummed about because that one is going to be about the oldest brother in the family and then Teddy, who is Emmy's best friend. We've basically gotten like little breadcrumbs of the two of them throughout the first 2 books, and I just know it's going to be so good. Like the enemies to lovers in it is going to be amazing. The two of them throughout the first 2 books, it's just such good banter they have. After going through my little cowboy phase, we jumped into a fun new fantasy book, which is The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. I received this in one of the cutest PR boxes ever, and when I was reading the little blurb about it, I got so excited because it kind of reminded me of Powerless by Lauren Roberts. There's very minor similarities between the 2 books, but I think it's the romance between the 2 main characters that's very similar to Powerless that I just love so much. This is basically about a girl named Naira though. She's a princess who flees the kingdom. She's just tired of being a prisoner in the castle. Father seems to be one of those cruel rulers that everybody is just kind of afraid of, including Naira. But in the middle of it all, there's currently a rebellion that's on the brink of war with the king. They're trying to fight back against him and fight back against his cruelties. There's just a lot of hatred in the kingdom right now. So when Naira flees the castle, she somehow finds herself in the hands of the rebellion, but they don't know that she's like the princess or the king's daughter. They basically take her in and start training her to become a warrior for the rebellion. That's when our MMC comes in, Dacre. He is the son to the leader of the rebellion, and he's also like the head leader of the warriors. So he's the one who's training Naira. Right off the bat though, Dacre doesn't really trust Naira. This sparks up a fun enemies to lovers. They're always butting heads. There's a lot of good banter in here, which I think is why I really enjoyed this story, because that's also very similar to Powerless. Our main character in Powerless, Pei, is also hiding her identity, and there's just like a lot of good banter in that book. That's what Naira and Dacre remind me of. So I think that's why I initially went into this really excited, and in the beginning I did really like it, but it ended up being a 3.5-star rating, and it's mainly because of like this spice. I don't know what it was. It just wasn't really it for me. I feel like Naira and Daiquiri's story was very heavy on the enemies to lovers, but it was very insta-lovey immediately after. I feel like the transition was just so fast and it was kind of weird. But there were some really, really cute moments between the two of them that I did really enjoy. There are some pretty funny moments in here where Daiquiri's getting jealous of other guys that are talking to Naira. And then overall, I thought the storyline was really fun and interesting. I think if I hadn't read Powerless and I went into this, it could have been a higher rating for me, but just because I had like that other book to compare it to, I liked the way Powerless did this more. So that was like the only gripe I had with it, but nonetheless, it's a really fun and interesting fantasy book. After the Veiled Kingdom though, we jumped into Icebound by Meredith Trapp. This is a cutie little hockey romance. It's actually book 1 in the Boundless Players series. Our main character, Rode, is a goalie in the NHL, and he's basically like getting to that age where he's considering retiring and he's struggling with what he's gonna do after hockey. And then our FMC is Nina. She's a young art student. She's actually planning to go away to Argentina after the semester ends. Basically, how her and Rode meet is they have this weird kind of meet cute where Nina is Rode's Uber driver after a night out at the bar. This whole crazy thing happens in the beginning of the story when she's driving him home, and Nina and Rode are immediately drawn to each other, but they're in totally different parts of their lives and they want totally different things right now. Nina is 22, about to go away to Argentina to work on art and school. The last thing she is thinking about is getting married and starting a family, whereas Rode is at that point in his life where he is thinking about getting married and having a family, and he's thinking about retirement and all this stuff. So they're in totally different parts of their lives, so they obviously can't be together or do anything together. Rode is also very heavy on the age gap in here. He basically makes an oath to himself and all his teammates that he won't go near Nina because she's so young for him, and he just knows it wouldn't work out. But nonetheless, they find themselves being thrown together over and over again. No matter how hard Rode tries to stay away from Nina, they just like end up together again. Like, he can't stay away from her. Life is basically throwing them together no matter how wrong they are for each other. That's like the basics of this book. I ended up rating it 3 stars. I feel like it had a lot of potential, but it was just lacking in a lot of parts for me. And I feel like it was also really repetitive. Like, I'm not even kidding. It felt like every single chapter Rode was talking about the age gap and how he couldn't do it. And it just got to a point where it was like, okay, I didn't really like how repetitive it was. And then I feel like the ending of this story was wrapped up so quickly. Like, for how much that happened in this book, for how hard Rode was fighting like the age gap and stuff like that, the way it kind of ended was just so quick. It kind of made it feel like the rest of this story didn't mean much because of how fast it wrapped up. And then I also feel like it was kind of overwritten. I feel like it kind of made it boring at times. It was still cute. I'm a sucker for hockey romances. I actually feel like what made me like that book so much were the side characters. I feel like the found family in that book is really good and it has a lot of potential. So I'm excited to see like what the next book will be like. Next up, we have Night Shift by Annie Crown. Going into this, I thought this was actually going to be a really, really cute basketball romance, but we quite literally don't read about basketball like at all in this. So it's about a basketball star, but we don't really get any basketball scenes in this. This is about a girl named Kendall though. She's basically a major bookworm. She loves romance books, and I actually tabbed and annotated this book. All of these tabs are literally book related quotes. They're all quotes about being a book lover and what it's like to read romance. A lot of very relatable, funny quotes in here, but that's really it. That's really where the good parts of this book end for me. I'm gonna rip the band-aid off. This was 2 stars. It was my lowest rating of the month, but also the year. I don't think I've rated a book 2 stars yet this year. Again, I feel like there's a lot of potential in this book, and I feel like it could have been like a really fun and cute book. It was really just like spice. The whole story takes place over the course of like a month, so it's a very insta-lovey type of story. And basically our main character Kendall, she works the night shift on Fridays at the library. Our main guy character is Vincent. He's the school basketball star, and him and Kendall basically have this really funny meet cute in the library. Very dramatic and out there and very in your face, which I think is so funny because she's actively talking about romance books in this and how dramatic they can be. Meanwhile, she has her own like dramatic meet cute with Vincent. Another reason why I didn't really like this book is it's very, very heavy on the miscommunication trope, and that's something that Kendall talks about a lot in the story, is how she hates the miscommunication trope, but then then she's actively doing it in her own life. So like the irony of it was just driving me crazy. I couldn't stand the miscommunication trope in this. That was so frustrating in this book, especially because it kept happening. Like Kendall would learn her lesson and be like, oh, we have to communicate more, and then she would just do the same thing again, and it was like driving me insane. The last like 50 pages just wasn't it for me. It was a flop for me, unfortunately, but there were some really cute book lover quotes in here. I do think there were some cute moments between Vincent and Kendall, but there was just like nothing crazy going on. Like the story in it just wasn't like, it wasn't that interesting. And then to finish off the month of April, I read Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This is book 2 in the Caraval series, and I was so excited to get into this because it's actually Donatella's story. If you're not familiar, book 1 is all about Scarlet, and she's the older sister to Donatella, and then book 2 is all about Donatella. I've literally been dying to read about her story, read about Jax and Dante and just like everything. So something I came to terms with after reading this is if I hadn't read Once Upon a Broken Heart first, I feel like going into Once Upon a Broken Heart, I would have had totally different feelings and like a totally different mindset, especially on Jax. And it just makes me wonder how I would have interpreted like Once Upon a Broken Heart. But nonetheless, this was so much fun. It actually ended up being 4 stars for me. I think I rated Caraval 3 stars. But in my opinion, I just felt like Scarlet's story was kind of boring. I feel like in this story though, Donatella had so much more to work for. I feel like her story was just more interesting. I think her love interests were more interesting. I just like this so much more. I feel like there was a lot more fun and action in it. I thought the ending of it was so interesting and fun, and I'm really excited to see what the last book has in store. That is all for my little April wrap up. This is a pretty good reading month for me. I'm actually really happy with how it went. I've been in such a weird reading slump, so it feels good to actually be reading books again and having fun with it. Even though we had a few 3 stars, we had a 2 star, we had some flops this month, I'm still really happy that I was able to get through 8 books of my physical TBR. And yeah, that is it for my wrap up though. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. If you made it this far in the video, comment down below what your favorite read of April was. But I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.